All right, so here we are in week 3. Last week we were really talking about player movement, and here we are in the platformer micro game. And on the player game object, I was really talking about how this player controller script, which I'm going to double click on it and let it open up. Oh, speaking of which, I should talk about this. So I realized in some of my classes on Friday that Visual Studio is no longer supported for Mac. And so I had to figure out how to connect up VS Code, and then I sent out an announcement about it. So if you're on a Mac um, and you want IntelliSense working and everything with the Unity plugin, I sent an announcement where you have to go into the VS Code marketplace, get the Unity plugin, then install this other SDK, and just restart everything. So this is what VS Code looks like if you're interested. And it runs fine, but I'm going to go back and switch back over to Visual Studio. But if anyone needs any help with setting up VS Code, let me know. I'm going to go back to regular Visual Studio, and I'm going to open up that player controller script. Good, looks like that. And the player controller script is a lot. And it does kind of get hairy pretty quickly, especially with the physics code and the math that's going on there. And I kind of glazed over a lot of that. And I'm not the biggest fan of this person's coding style, but I was thinking about that after class. It's actually beneficial to see other people's coding styles, and even stuff that like just feels ugly to you. It just doesn't look like good code, because you do have to work with other people's code. You do have to work in a team and edit and change other people's code or talk to them and understand what's happening with it. And you will develop your own coding styles and over the years. And I wish the way that this code was structured was a little simpler. Like, I didn't want to talk about inheritance and jumping between code files like in this kinematic object, but it is what it is. And it's a little bit of a rough ramp up with you guys, I know. But, so I'm not requiring you to like write out code that's working and stuff and build your own projects. It's just understanding the concepts and following along with me, and then letting you mod where you're able to enjoy it and grow your understanding of it. But it's good to just see different coding styles and adapt to it, and see different coding languages, and it's all great experience anyway in the long run. So anyway, player controller script, it's a little ugly, but it gets the job done. And I was talking about how it connects up to the render, where we get our visuals, and what is a sprite and a sprite asset. And it's this file, and these sprites are, this is all coming from a PNG or an image file, and then they get like chopped up into sprites. And there's this sprite editor that lets you like pull out, create little images from a bigger image. And then we went over the animator and how it gets like these properties exposed. So here's the different states. We transition between them. Each state's an animation, and these properties or these parameters are exposed, and we like update them from our code, from our player controller. And based on how these are changing, we figure out if we need to do transitions between different states. And the animation is really based on the game object, and you can like select properties, components that you want to animate their properties. And you can even go down into game objects that are underneath game objects and animate them as well, but we just have one game object in this prefab. And the sprite animation is really just changing different images, whereas the 3D animation is kind of like usually changing the transform properties in some way. And then the code was connecting, like was manipulating the rigid body. Ultimately, you saw all the way through all the code going through kinematic object, which is over here, and all the way at the end of the day, this body variable is the rigid body 2D, and get rid of some of this stuff. Because if you remember when we on the awake, we like connect up everything, and here's that collider 2D. And somehow that's connected to this body. I'm just gonna take a quick look around. What's this here? Ah, here it is. On enable. Get component rigid body 2D. So it's a little annoying, but this is what's inherited to player controller. So that the variable is connected to the rigid body component. But ultimately, after all our physics processing, after the user processing user input, we grab the position of the rigid body and set it. And we'll maybe get into this code a bit more. I'm not interested in diving too much into the math, but more about the principles of it. So we did talk about kind of vectors a few classes ago. Anyway, that was how the rigid body component is being communicated with the player controller. We didn't really talk about audio sources. But I was kind of saying when you click play and we're checking for user input, and we're determining if we should move the character left or right, that this is the animation, the animator, making him look like he runs, but we're really just moving this game object left and right with the rigid body part of the physics system. And if we didn't have an animation playing, it would just look weird. You would just get moved back and forth. I don't know if I could turn it off without causing errors. But yeah, this is how it looks like with just the rigid body. It's a static image sprite, and we're flipping it left and right, so at least we have that going. But he looks like he's just kind of like guy gliding or floating, so the animation's really to add a lot. All right. And last but not least, I never even went back to where we check for any update loop, which is run every frame, every little section of a second. We check user input. And we talked about like the input manager and all these axi, just because there's so many different controllers to check for. So it's abstracted a bit. Cool. Unless somebody has any questions to dive deeper into it, like I enjoyed doing that because I was able to like knock out an actual script component, a renderer component, an animator component, a rigid body component. It was like all that of the player game object we were able to talk about in 1 week or 1 class or so. So somebody after class was like, "Hey, what's up with the health thing? It's kind of messed. It's like I'm trying to add health in its weird script." And I was like, "Oh yeah, I remember because I modded this project. It was like a year ago, and one of the projects was to add health to the player or the enemy. Right now, the player doesn't have health. He takes 1 hit and he dies, and then he just gets restarted. I don't even know if there's an idea of lives. I think we did that mod too. Like he just keeps dying and respawning back at the spawn point. So I have to go through how that's happening. And same with the enemy. The enemy just gets 1 hit and dies, right? Let me shrink this chat window a little bit. Cool. So someone's like, I'm trying to add health to the player or something, and it's just really annoying. And yeah, I do remember it being an annoying task, so let's go take a look at it. So we have health component, which is just a C# script. Well, all these components are C# scripts, but this is one that somebody wrote, a developer wrote it as opposed to a Unity developer. So we will get into how this box collider is working as well in this process. But let's start with looking at the health. Let me see what the player controller is doing with it first off. So the player controller starts up and it says, okay, who's my health component? That's great. And it looks like it doesn't use it. It connects to it, but it never calls anything on it. Okay. So let's look at health. Okay, public int max 8 hit point is 1. And so I just want to look in the inspector here. Max hit point 1. Okay. Bool, are you alive? So this is interesting when you. I'm not really going to talk about how much I want to get involved. Let's just know it's saying like. Notice when I hover over this, it says it's a field. So it's like a property. It's just a variable, right? You can, it's public, so you could actually read it, which is called getting, and you could write to it. You could update it, which is called setting. Now, you don't always want to do that. Usually, like you make your little fields, you make your little variables private because you don't want somebody going in and messing with them, another object going in and messing with them because things can break easily. So usually you'll like write a little public method, like a get, they call them like getter setters. And I was just seeing if there are any here. And you'll like, in a nice, safe way, you'll like say, oh, if somebody wants to check my health, I'll like return that to them, that value. Or if someone wants to change it, I'll check if it's like a good value to change it to and if I should be changing it. So normally like you have these kind of these methods that wrap around your little fields that can edit them. But sometimes you just want to do it in a little quick shot here. So this is a bool. It's not a method, right? It's just like a property. And as I hover over it, notice it says just get. So it's like they wrote a little function. It's like a little anonymous function. This little arrow icon. It's like saying, hey, is alive is going to be set to this. So whenever somebody references this property, says, hey, tell me your bool. Tell me if you're alive or not, true or false. It actually kind of runs this line of code as if it's like running a method, like a getter, and saying, hey, if current hit point, this variable here, which if you notice it's private, nobody else can access it. So if this private variable is greater than 0, then we'll return true. Else, if this is not greater than 0, we'll return false. So the character is alive if this is greater than 0, this field here. Now we have, let's see, we got a method called increment. So it's public, and it just increments our hit points. So this is, a clamp is really useful. So this is coming from the math library, math F. F means float. So like it's math functions that could be run on floats or, one value as opposed to like a vector math library. So there's a lot of useful ones in here. I'll just introduce you to clamp. So you pass in a value. You pass in 3 inputs. You pass in, and notice that they're all integers. I'm sure there's they must be just using the int version of it. There's also a float version of it. But you pass in the value, the min, and the max. So it's useful to just say, okay, there was some manipulation done on this value, and I don't want it to ever go below a min and ever go above a max. And so if it's in between the min and max, you just get the value back. Or else if it's too low, you get the min. If it's too high, you get the max. So this is saying, hey, we're going to increment current HP by 1. And if for whatever reason that's less than 0, you're going to get 0. But if it's ever more than max HP, you're going to get max HP back, which is 1. And decrement looks to be similar. Clamp, take 1 away, 0 to max. And if we're over at 0, if we ever decrement our health and it gets to 0, we're going to have to schedule an event. And I'll get into, this looks a little different. I'll get into what that means. But the idea of events are like super important in games and actually web development as well. And then we have some type of die. So something happened, our health dropped down, and it looks like keep decrementing our health. So if our current hit point is still above 0, keep decrementing it down. Sure. And so I guess what happens is that we keep decrementing here, and eventually we get to the point where like death is scheduled, the event of death. And what does that mean? So on awake, we take whatever our max is and put it into current. All right. So we have some functionality to work with there. And so basically what's happening is on awake, just set our current HP to max, whatever max is. So set it to 1, and we have 1 health. So it looks like something there's got to change. But let me click on a blob, and I think the actual impact that we're interested in, if I remember correctly, might be on the enemy controller. I'm just going to take a quick look. Yeah, on collision. Okay, so here we got to get into a little bit of physics talk. So, box collider. Here's where we're not dealing with rigid body. We're not dealing with like kinematics. We're not dealing with forces, acceleration, and what have you for player movement. Here we're actually interested in collisions. So when does a player touch like those death zones, or when does it touch an enemy? So if I click here and I said edit collider, and you can see, oh, there's this little kind of rectangle sitting on this player, and it's a box collider. And this is how we're going to tell when the player like touches the ground, when they're coming down from a jump and we're allowed to jump again. And it's also going to help us when they're picking up collectibles. There's a circle collider on this token. And for right now, we need to say, what does it mean to come into contact with an enemy? And so the enemy has a rigid body, so it must be, so somehow you can like move it around. But I'm really interested in, it's got a capsule collider, which, I mean, it's a circle. But anyway, you could do this with a circle or a capsule collider. But here's a collider I'm interested in. And if I go back to the enemy controller, I'm just going to ignore everything except this. So somebody needs to register a collision. When you have 2 game objects and they've got colliders on them, right? And you're interested in knowing when they touch. We have on collision enter, on collision stay, and on collision exit. So for 3D, it's that. For 2D, just put 2D after everything. So enter 2D, stay 2D, exit 2D. So kind of like in the update loop when we're always checking for user input, we have, oh wait, did the user press the mouse button? Did they press the mouse button? And we're getting false most of the time, and then we just hit true once. Here, I'm just checking my time real quick. Okay. Here, this is only true that first frame when these 2 colliders touch each other. And then for every frame after that, if they're still touching, the on collision stay method will get called. And when that first frame, when they like leave each other space, when they don't touch each other, we'll get that on collision exit. In this situation, on collision enter works just fine. It'll only be called that first frame that they come into collision. And notice that they have an input parameter of type collision 2D. This is an object, and it records all this data about this collision that we're going to check. So remember, this is sitting on the enemy now. It could have been on the player or the enemy or whatever, but here they decide to say, put this on the enemy's game object. So the enemy collider component will actually call it. The enemy collider component kind of like looks out on all the components that are sitting on the same game object and sees if that method is sitting there, and then calls it saying, hey, I just had a collision. What do you want me to do? And so what are we going to do? So take this collision object and get the game object property. So this is the game object, the other one, the other side of the collision. Who did I just hit from the enemy's perspective? So we want to know if they fell off a cliff and they hit like a dead zone, or if they touched a player. And so whatever we just collide with, get the game object and go hunt around on it. Go look around for its components and see if there's a player controller on it, and put it into this variable. So if they ever hit the dead zone, or if they hit a token or something else that has a collider but does not have a player controller component on it, this will be null. But if it's not null, if this variable of type player controller is not null, then we know that we've just touched the player. So null is a very special keyword. And so objects, variables, like they need to point to something or they point to nothing. So even primitives, it's like saying, hey, I am referencing an object. It's an integer object, and the value just happens to be 7, but I am actually pointing toward an object in memory. Pointers are variables, can also just be pointing at nothing. It's like, hey, I created this variable of type player, but I'm not actually referencing anything yet, you know, or maybe I am. I don't know. Let's do a check here. Let's do an if check. Is it pointing at something or is it not? If it is, hey, we just hit the player. So what happens when we hit the player? So how much of this schedule, if I go to definition of it, this is something that this developer wrote. And if we come up here, it's part of this class that they wrote called a simulation. And they're like, this is getting into some deep CS topics, like heap queues. You don't need to know about this. Dictionaries you'll end up using very frequently, but we've yet to really talk about like arrays and lists. But dictionaries are super useful. And you know, there's a lot of craziness going on in here, and this is where I could tell, like, oh, this person was showing off. This developer was trying to get hired by Unity or something, because they like making their own stacks and event pools and generic stuff that is like super complex and is supposed to be hidden. All this is basically supposed to be like written in C++ in Unity engine, and is supposed to be like hidden away from you when you the game developer are writing in C#. And it's supposed to be like you can write some really elaborate gaming logic without having to understand this deeper computer science stuff. And so when I see this, it's saying, oh, this person's showing off. But whatever. I'm just going to say they made a little scheduling system, and which Unity already kind of has. But it's interesting to look at in that as you approach this more and more, and this makes sense to you, and it's less scary, you know that you're making like some really good progress in your skill sets. And to talk about how we schedule up events. So you don't need to understand any of this, and I'm not going to quiz you on any of that. Just know that basically he's going to schedule this object of type player enemy collision, and this is also coming. It's a type of it's inheriting from the simulation events, and you kind of have to know just to move around a little bit in here, just to do some modding a little bit. But events are think about in like the update loop when you're constantly checking for user input, and 99% of the time you're just getting falses back, and it's like, well, maybe there's a better way to do this. And you'll notice it with user interfaces a lot. Is that like you shouldn't always be, hey, is this button been clicked yet? Hey, has this slider been moved yet? You know, like checking over and over again. What you do is you use these UI components or other stuff. They create an event. Other parts of the code, other objects can listen to the events. Listening just means like subscribing one of your methods to it, like saying, hey, whenever this event gets triggered, just call my method. Like, I don't even want to worry anymore. I don't want to even think about this. Just say, hey, whenever your event gets fired off, just let me know about it, and I can like think about what I'm going to do in that type of situation. So when somebody clicks a button in the UI, you say, oh, the user wanted to pause the game. Fine, I'll run all my logic that pauses the game. So in this situation, this is an event scheduler saying, hey, we can't like fire off all this stuff. It's going to get like out of sequence. It's just too much at once. It's going to like throw down the computer. We kind of have to schedule these events and do one processing at a time. And so here, this is the player-enemy collision. And what it's doing is it's doing what's trying to figure out is who's hurting who. So if you have the player, you can think of there's a few different situations, right? If they're like running into each other, you can think who's supposed to damage who. In this situation, the enemy damages the player, right? So if there's ever a situation like this where like somehow the enemy maybe like fell off a cliff and you just weren't paying attention, you're standing there and he landed on your head, well then the enemy should hurt you. And in this situation, since it's a platformer, if you happen to be above, then we consider it a situation where you were jumping or falling and you landed on the enemy, so you should hurt the enemy. But it's like, where's these like lines in the sand? Like, is this like, am I still falling if I somehow came in like this? Like, this is obvious that I should hurt the enemy. This is obvious that the enemy should hurt me. But what if our colliders come in and it's like getting something like this? You know, it's something that's like not clear. You have to decide where your boundaries are and just do a lot of gameplay testing and keep tweaking. So this is saying, okay, take the bounds of the collider, take the center point of it, and give me its y value. So it's like saying, take this box collider and figure out the center point of it. So there's an x and a y component of that center point. And tell me what it is. Tell me the y value. So wherever the player is moving at that little frame, at that little point, you know, let's just, whatever the y value comes out to that center of that box value, let's just figure out what that is. And if that's greater than or equal to the top of the enemy, so if I click on this enemy and click on this, it's actually way up here. So somebody must have been doing some testing and figured out, you know, the collider needs to be offset this much for it to like be challenging and feel appropriate for gameplay. So the center of the player, his waist area, needs to be above this point. So it's almost like it needs to be like about here. This is kind of like the boundary area. And anything above this to here, the enemy will get hurt. And anything less, the player will get hurt. And that just happens to make sense with gameplay testing. So anyway, we figure out who's going to get hurt. Is it the player or the enemy? And it's just it turns it, and this is a logical check. So it's going to be a true or false. So when you see vars, this is coming from JavaScript and web development. As these languages like kind of coexist longer and longer, they like bleed into each other. So technically, C# is a strongly typed language, and strongly typed means, oh, you need to say, is this variable an int, a bool, is it a game object, whatever, is it an enemy controller? But this is kind of like not lazy programming, but this is like interpreted like by the compiler. So like, oh, you're doing a logical check here, so this must be a bool. But it's like, just write bool. Like, can you just like help out your fellow people? But anyway, this is actually very common in JavaScript, saying, hey, tell me, you figure out what the variable is going to be. Because in JavaScript, you actually don't need to define it. JavaScript will do it for you. So anyway, if we determine that we're supposed to hurt the enemy, then go get the enemy's health component. And if that's not null for whatever reason, if the enemy doesn't have a health component, which, let me take a look, maybe it doesn't. Yeah, enemy does not have any health component. So if there's no enemy health, then, I'm sorry, if we do have enemy health, decrement it, the health. And if the enemy's still alive, or if the enemy's not alive anymore, schedule its death. And the player will bounce. So we'll look at this, the player will bounce a little bit. Else, just make the player bounce a lot more, that the enemy's not dead. So they actually started to implement some code here to check, oh wait, maybe the enemy does have a health script on it, and maybe there's more than one health unit. So this is interesting. We might be able to create a mod on it pretty quickly. Else, this means, oh, okay, there was no enemy health. There is no health component on the enemy game object, and if that's the case, then we should just act like the enemy had one health and just kill it right away. Notice this is the same logic as right here. And then this else is, well, we should hurt the player. Now notice we just schedule player death. We don't even check anything. Like, there is no logic here to deal with damaging the player. We just kill the player. So I'm not going to look into this code right now because time is running down and I'm trying not to lecture the whole class. But since we already have some logic here for the enemy, let's try to like hurt the enemy. So we know that the case that the enemy doesn't have a health component on it, right? So that means we're going to go right here. We're going to schedule an enemy death, which, like, okay, play some animation on it to change its graphics to look like it's dying, and then maybe like delete the game object and give the player a score or whatever the logic is, and then make the player have a small bounce. I just remember this, that this lower number means give it like a smaller bounce. So that's pretty. So the next step is we could move to getting this code run. We can just add the health component onto an enemy, and he'll have one health, and this will happen. But it should be pretty easy to add a few health points to the enemy. So here is the health script. It's in this location. I am going to move down here at the bottom of this enemy I've selected, go down to the bottom inspector, and drag health onto it. And max HP is 1. I'm just going to move the player back a little bit. I don't know if he's going to spawn way back at the original spawn point, or if he's going to spawn right next to the enemy. I don't remember what the... Okay, cool. So the reason I just wanted to move him a little bit off is I don't feel like running all the way down here to get to him. So let's jump on him. Okay, behavior is the same, although this time I died. Interesting. I mean, I killed the enemy and I killed myself. Let me just remove the health script on the enemy, and let me just, I'm trying to figure out what how that logic just worked out. Okay, I jump on the enemy, and I was above it. this thing right here, I was above the enemy, so that made sense. What didn't make sense to me is that I added a health um, component onto the enemy, and all of a sudden I killed myself along with the enemy. Yeah, interesting.
Could it be like a lingering hitbox?
I just want to make sure it's not. Let me make sure running into the side of him just kills me, and then I gotta start figuring out. Yeah, I don't know if it's a lingering hitbox. Let me see. Okay. So just adding a health onto the enemy made so it was like this was true. Let me see how many times. So yeah, maybe it is. So let me do a debug.log, and let me say I'm just gonna say hit or something. I just want to see how many times this hit came out. How many times are we running that method? And probably it's. Oops, did I not put a semicolon? I put a semicolon. Yeah, this thing is like always running. No. I was debugging out something else last time. Over in kinematic object. Hold on a second. I think that's just some BS. Okay. Boom. Hit. Oh, you know what? I think I am staying in the small spot no matter what. Never mind. Let's see. We got a hit. Now we got one hit. Oop. That's weird. One hit, but I still killed myself. Let me just double check that that's the case. Focus error. Yeah, it is one hit. One. Did I change this code another time and not remember? So, enemy decrement. If you're dead, schedule the death of the enemy and bounce the player. Let me just double check bounce. Bounce. Are you just setting the Y velocity? Okay. So let's figure out what's happening here. Let's kill the bounce. Let's move this debug way down into here. Let's make sure I am going all the way down into this if statement here. I don't know why this is like a graphs. This is like some Unity engine thing. It's one of this platformer thing must be just. It's like something with the editor scripting in this game is causing it. It's got nothing to do with me. Alright, I am hitting him. Yeah, we're scheduling this enemy death. 1 minute 30 seconds. 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 1 minute 30 secon So we are getting into here. That's good. I'm not going to schedule his death, and I'm going to bounce like really high. And let me just see what happens then. So I should really bounce like super high and get away from him. And I'm not scheduling the enemy death because I don't know if that part of the code's messing things up. Okay, that's what I wanted to see. I flew up way too high. There must be some like kill zone way up high, so that was way too much bounce. Let me chop it down to like 10. I like introduced other variables. Like I must have gotten too high and hit something. I'm not sure, but let me do less of a bounce. I don't want to try to kill myself, because I'm trying to figure out where in the codes it's getting a little messed up. Okay, no, I did. I couldn't move when I jumped. It would have been hard to see, but I went to like a death pose while I jumped. So it's not. This isn't causing to kill me. The bounce, I could kind of put it back on something lower.
Professor, could... No, never mind.
I'm going to put a debug down here. This is where the player gets killed. I just want to make sure it's not something where somehow like we're getting into this method twice or something. It's also calling to kill the player. Weird. He's dying. It's killing the player and it's not even going down here. So somehow it's like, let me see something here. Did I tweak something that I wasn't aware of? Because I don't remember the behavior acting like that. So, you know what? This is something weird. I'm going to pop it off for right now. And let me go to the player side. And let me try to get the player. Let's say the player has 2 hit points, right? Let's try to get some hit points going on the player, so because it's confusing me. So let's just make this public too, because I want to see it. You know, it's probably good to show you. I could still make this a private, like a field. You can't mess around with it, but if you do, what's it called? Like serialized field. Yeah, serialized field. Let me show you what happens when you. This is like a little macro command, and this says like this underneath it. Yes, it's going to be private. Other objects can't mess around with it, but you can still see it in the inspector, and you can actually still tweak it in the inspector. So this is like the safest way. Like, don't make stuff public if you just want to tweak it in the inspector. Make it a serialized field, make it private, and then you can still tweak it, but other objects can't go in and mess with it. So let me click play first off. Let me see if this current HP goes to 2. Does. Awesome. You know what? Since I'm getting this error and it's acting a little bit weird, I'm just gonna. I'm gonna save it. I'm just gonna close it and restart it. Just give me 1 second. while that's opening, I am going to go back to the collision, and I'm going to make use of some stuff here. So since the enemy was already kind of partially programmed to take damage, I know that I can reuse some of this. So down here, this is where the player gets hurt. So I could say this is where we're going to hurt the player, right? And we don't have to kill the player right now. We can actually do something like this. So let's just copy and paste it. So here I'll call it player health. We're going to get the health component on the player. So up top here we've got the two. When a collision happens, we get access to the enemy and the player controller. And I'm just going to write out the player health side while I'm waiting for Unity to restart. So I already know down here it's called what I want is called the player health. So let's see. If we have access to the player health component, we're going to decrement it. If you're not alive yet, we're going to schedule player death. Guessing because it was .enemy. I have to take a look at it, but I'm guessing it's going to be. Oh, player death doesn't need. Okay, yeah, I can see here. It doesn't need you don't need to define. I guess because there's multiple enemies in one player, you don't really need to define which player is going to die here. And if we're killing the player, we don't really need to bounce them. And I shouldn't have this down here. I could put in, so if we don't have a player health, which we will have a component for that, but just in case, just kill the player. Now what happens here? This is, we hurt the player, but he's still alive. So what do we do in this situation? I'm just looking about the enemy here. So I'm not sure yet. So maybe we want to like at least like the current health. Actually, I probably will want to bounce him up. I don't know what else I want to do to him, but I'll leave it at like a big bounce. Like he needs to get out of the way for right now. And I gotta wrap this up soon. So let's see if I can get the player to take damage and then ignore this mess of an enemy situation. So maybe it's because I moved him off his point. Maybe because it was this weird editor error. I don't know. But let's give it a go now. Let's see where we're at here. So player should have 1 health. I'm going to run up. Player is 0 health. We die. That was weird. So let me just schedule the player death here and just return. I'm done. Return means like exit this function, so this line of code, but all that code will never run. That's why it says unreachable code detected. I'm not so interested in that right now. Let's see. Yeah, kill the player. And okay.
Professor, why did you put the return statement at the beginning?
Because I wanted to run this line of code. I wanted to see if the player death is fine.
But won't that make everything else after it inaccessible?
Yeah, that's what I wanted to do because this was acting weird. So I just wanted to make sure that works correctly. So that's good. So there's something here. So player get component health. So even if this is null, we should go right into here. So I'm gonna say they're gonna decrement the health, which let me just double check that. So yeah, take one off, that's fine. If this is 0, schedule this health as 0 event. Let me just see what this is doing. Oh, okay. When this happens, we schedule. Okay, we're getting like a double event call, I think. So it looks like in my collision here, we schedule player death, but it looks like we're also getting here, and let me move the health over here. So it looks like when we decrement, we're getting this is called, and this thing is also calling a player death. So I bet you that thing. So this should not be. We should just be decrementing the health. Yeah. And letting. Yep. So we do not want to do this. Okay. So we're going to decrement the health by 1. Let the health component take care of everything else. And if the player is still alive, then we can bounce it. Okay. Oh, I bet you that's why it was bugging out with the enemy too. So one thing you'll notice in programming, and it took me a long time to understand this, is it's one of those fields where it's complicated. There's a lot of math, and you get a lot of people in it who are super smart, but you also get crazy egos, and people love talking down to you and love making you feel stupid because it makes them feel better. And you'll see it in their code. So complex ideas and complex logic, when it's done well and smartly, looks simple and it's easy to read. And then you'll get stuff like this where people try to execute complex ideas, or they're trying to show off, and they write in complex ways, and it's hard to understand, and that's actually kind of shooting yourself in the foot. And you'll see it when you go out in the job market, and it's just something you have to deal with life, and you'll start to learn that it's okay to be yourself and develop your own style, and that it's actually better code is actually easier to understand, even though it looks simpler. But you'll see this like ego trap where people are like trying to show off. Anyway, I think when I'm reading this stuff, I just feel like I'm in that situation, and it's a good life lesson. Anyway, I lost my train of thought. It still didn't work. Okay, get your health. If we have the component, decrement the health, let the health do the rest. If we don't have a component, just schedule his death. I don't think this is being called at all, but sorry. Player health, decrement. If you're alive, I want you to bounce up. Otherwise, you should just die. Okay, that's what I want to try to get to. And let me look at the health. Okay. So click play. And okay, current health is 1. And I meant current health of 0. Okay, that works fine. Decrement. If health is 0, schedule health is 0. Schedule player death. I'm just going to try and schedule it correctly. Because what if it's for an enemy? Oh well, let me just see if it was that schedule first. Strange. I remember having this issues like a year ago. Maybe that their like weird scheduling code isn't working with updated Unity. So this is actually running. Because I see that their current HP does go down, does go to 0. So this does hit 0. For some reason, player death. If player health is alive, we're going to call die, and then we're going to disable the camera, disable the player control, play an audio, and mess around with the animator, and schedule a spawn within 2 seconds. Okay, this is not being alive. Okay, so let me trace this back real quick here. So schedule health is 0. Let's go look at that. Let me pull this out, move over here. And then player that will schedule player death. Let me pull this out, bring it over here. So at this point, I'm feeling like this is false, and this actually isn't happening, and that's the problem. So, is alive. So no, this would be false at that point, because this would not be 0. Okay, so let's see. We get hit, right? Decrement gets called. We get our hit points taken to 0. This becomes true. We go into here, which basically just jumps us right over into player death. But this would be false at this point. It's so weird. Like, why are you doing an if check here? If we're scheduling a player death, and we know that current HP is 0, and this is alive, be like, okay. So let me just say, if you're dead, because we already know you're dead, I'm just tempted to take this whole if statement. You know what? Forget it. Take it out. If we're going to schedule his death, we know that he's dead. So let's see if that fixes it. Health is 1. Health is 0. And we schedule death. Okay. That works. So I ended up taking the if statement out here because the player's already dead. There's some bad logic. I'm sure something in the scheduling system that the dev made this just for like that one particular situation with the game setup would have been true, but if you try to mod it, this gets messed up. So I pulled out that if statement here. So let's go back now. So now let's say, okay, so let's say that the player, so an on awake for health, so we can set how much, okay, so max HP. So for the player, let's give them like 3 health, okay? And maybe for the enemy, we could do something else. But okay, now the player's got 3 health. So what happens when they hit? So when we hurt the player and we decrement the health, if the player is still alive, let's just bounce them up really high. No, because you'll be underneath. So okay, I remember this. So let's give him a direction here. Just to like, so we don't want to bounce him up because he's just going to be like right in the enemy. Let's bounce him to the left. Like just to start with, let's just move him to the left because I know he's going to be coming in from the right in this simple situation. So to do that, we have to pass in a sorry, what was it? Right, bounce. It had to be a vector, right? Like new vector 2. The X, I'm going to push him hard to the left, and I'll push him up just a little bit. And we're going to do that. So what this is saying is we're going to call the bounce method here, which happens to be under kinematic object. But we can, this one's a more sophisticated bounce. It doesn't have to go up and down. We can go now left, right, or mixtures. And I'm gonna push them hard to the left. And to do that, you have to pass in a new vector. So we could have declared a vector like vector 2 direction and declared it, and then passed that in. But I just ended up just declaring it right within it. But you could do something like this too, just so you know. In either case, what I'm really trying to do is saying, okay, you hit the enemy. Let's get you out of its collision, its collider area, so that you can like try to make a smarter decision instead of just killing yourself outright. So here we got 3 hit points, and I'm going to run up. 2, 1, 0. Okay, so he does have 3 health. That's good. But we're not getting the bounce that I want. Yeah, take a vector 2. Velocity. I mean, I'll try and like make some crazy. Maybe the numbers are too low, but.
Professor, I have a question about bounce. How in the previous examples they only put 1 integer, while here we're inputting a vector. So what happens if you put the default of an integer?
That's nice. You kind of jumped over it. A default? No, it depends on how these were declared. So I see that there's 2 bounce. They defined a bounce method that receives a float, and a bounce method that receives. They defined it. Like I can't just like call stuff that doesn't exist. So I have a choice here because the developer defined a bounce that's just purely up and down, and then a bounce that can be a mixture of left, right, up and down.
Okay, I was wondering because. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so I can't like make up anything else besides that. But I'm trying to give it like something really big. I'm really trying to get him out of there. But and I have a few minutes remaining. So hopefully I'm answering the student's question. And then on Friday I'll have to jump over to the enemy. But it took me a while to figure out. Like now that I know how to unbreak some of the stuff. Wow, nice. So it looks like he gets pushed up. It's like the upward trajectory works really well. It's like the X. I don't think whoever built this meant for the second one to be used when it has left and right, because it doesn't seem to be pushing him left and right at all. But I might just move him. I think that's what I did last year. Yeah, stupid. This method's like stupid. But what I will do with bounce is instead of velocity, I'm just gonna, when I do use this two-dimensional thing here, you notice that you have this body position here. So basically, I'm gonna say body position is in 3 vector 2. Okay. Weird. It's passing in a vector 3 and passing to the position. Interesting. Just double checking when we do the move. This is a vector 2. Okay. So what I will do is say new position. Vector 2 position equals body dot position. So I'm going to want to move him up a little bit into the left. Yeah, okay. I know what I'll say. 2 take body dot position x plus 2x. I'll explain this in 1 second. Just gotta see if it works. Okay. And ultimately, what do I want to say here? Actually, I just want to say this. Get rid of your code. And let me see. Now, I did some really, if I remember right, my numbers were like, yeah, he's going to be like way off screen, but it's okay. It's a good, just to see if it works the way I'm thinking. So let me just hit him. Yeah, he flies him off. God knows where. Okay, this works well. So what I really want to do is just move him a few units. So if you notice, the player's at 0, 0. I might want to just move him like this much to the left. Looks like 2 units, and maybe like a unit up. Okay. So I think I just want like a -2 and a +1, and let's just give it a go. Okay, cool. And then 2 health, 1 health, and death. Cool. Now we gave the player health. So what did I do here was, well, first I went to the health, and I just exposed this so I could see what's happening. I don't really change this, but I did go to max HP, and then the inspector, I did bump it up to 3, so it gave him some extra health. Now, what is happening? Oh, and then I did have to go to player death and get rid of this if statement because it's broken logic. And then in the player enemy collision area, I basically replicate what I was seeing with the enemy here. So I said, okay, here, instead of just killing the player, what we're going to do is go get its health component, check if it's valid, if it actually exists, and then we're going to call decrement. And I'm not killing him or anything because that's already handled in health, like when he gets to 0. But if he's still alive after taking a point away, I then create a vector 2D. I say, okay, I want to go 2 units to the left and 1 unit up. And so here, if he was standing on the blob here, he would be at this position. So we would go 2 units somewhere around here and 1 unit up and place him over there. Get him out of harm's way. All right. Now that's what this is doing here. Create a variable type vector 2D and set it to a new vector 2 object with this data in it. An x of -2 and a y of 1. A new operator, and create a new object in type vector 2. And then we store our variable, which is really like a pointer. It's referencing this new object. All right. And then we take that variable, we pass it in here. We say player bounce. And we're going to pass in a vector 2, which goes over to this kinematic object, the parent class of the player controller. And yes, there's different bounce methods, but they're defined by what input they take. This one takes a vector 2, right? This is the one that's going to get called. And whatever logic in there was crap. So I just said, okay, get your rigid body 2D component and take its position. And the only reason I knew about this is because last week we were talking about how we're moving the character left and right, and this is how they're moving the character left and right. So I erased it. And it receives a vector 2. So I said, create a new vector 2. Take whatever your position in the X was before this bounce is about to happen, and add this little, -2. Take this -2 that's coming in, and add it to where you are. So move yourself to the left 2 units. That's what that's saying. And then take where you were in the Y and just add 1 unit. Move you up 1 unit from your last position. And we made a new vector 2 from that. We passed that into the position of the rigid body. And we're done. And that's it. And then when the player gets to 0, we kill it. So I'm going to stop there. I'm over time. And I'll move on to the enemy, fixing that up. All right. So you're free to go. Let me know if you have any questions.
Have a nice one, Professor.
Yep. Yeah, you too. Have a good one.
Have a good one, Professor. Bye.